Welcome back. Welcome back. We ended our last episode talking about courage, the power that just the smallest act of courage has to create enormous shifts out of pain, out of our perceived failure, out of a feeling of hopelessness and despair. And after we finished the episode, I said to Natalia, I don't think it's okay just to talk about courage in a vacuum. It's just not enough. And my hope on this show is that we always, always, always give you tools that are helpful in your survival journey. So today we're going to talk about courage a little bit more, but how courage absolutely gets supercharged when we're willing to explore the stories we are carrying within ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves that hold us back from healing. So join us today. Let's talk about rewriting those stories that keep us stuck. And let's begin to transform our journeys into something that we most desire to be. And I'm here again today with my good friend, Natalia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? So
It's
excited to be
nice
here
have
again.
you. Yeah, super happy to be here. We hear a lot in our culture about this term limiting beliefs. And I've looked at a lot of definitions of it, and there are a lot of good ones, but the simplest and kind of cut straight to the point, Tony Robbins says limiting beliefs are just the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves that keep us from becoming our best. And it is those limiting beliefs, that, oh my gosh, and can I tell you, I only have a million of them?
Don't we all?
And I'm constantly trying to rewrite my story to get rid of them, to get unstuck.
I know.
And I'm stuck more than I'm unstuck.
But isn't it crazy how we magnify the bad stuff, right? Like the bad thoughts, and like maybe somebody would tell you something and then you make that your own story, and you forget everything else that's good in your life, and you just suddenly that takes over the whole room.
Absolutely.
Like somebody might say something to you one day, and for example, I remember when I was going through my divorce, and I think I've mentioned this before, my ex-husband, out of his anger in a moment, said, "Oh, you're never gonna make it by yourself." That carried away for so long in my head, and it had so much power. It was a comment he made in one moment, being upset.
Yeah.
Probably didn't have the intention to affect that way, but it did.
It's an imprint, and we all have them. We have imprints from childhood. We have imprints from yesterday. We have imprints from what's happened to us in school and college and business. And the negatives overcome us, and we hold on to them. And then we cycle into these stories and we just repeat them. The more we repeat them, that's the life we create in front of us.
And it does require us to constantly be taking a look at ourselves and taking ownership. I think when we talk about courage, is having this courage to look at ourselves and be honest and vulnerable with ourselves. What is it true and what's not? Like,
I really like what you just said.
Thanks.
I don't want to run past it because, we talked a lot about having courage, and I felt guilty about, oh my gosh, we left our listeners with this idea that you could just pull courage up out of anywhere and, let's get out of our despair and hope, have courage. And I was like, Teresa, that's just the worst thing. But what you just said is to have the courage to turn inward, to look at ourselves, and then have the courage to go, this isn't working. How do I walk out of this?
And it's a courage combined with some grace. You need to have courage and have grace towards yourself, that it's okay for you not to be okay. It's okay for certain situations to not turn perfect. For some days you not feel great about yourself. Some days you have that kind of like, okay, I'm not feeling myself my best, but how do I make myself feel better? How do I turn things around? You have to have ownership. We all have limiting beliefs. We all have poor conversations about ourselves. And instead of lingering on those, how do you get out of them? I think that's what we have to figure out, and that's where the power is.
So I was really thoughtfully and prayerfully thinking about this as we were preparing for the show, and I thought, what do I have in my past? What's in my toolbox? What stories do I have to share that somebody might hang on to? And I really believe I love the power of stories, because that's what you hold on to
Yep.
more than you hold on to, rewrite your story of limiting beliefs, And so I wanted to share with you a story. It's a very precious place in my life. Um, when I was born, my grandmother was 44 years old,
Oh, wow.
and she had 6 children. And 6 months after I was born, and this is important to the later part of the story, I
Okay.
will land it. 6 months after I was born, her husband, whom she married when she was 18 years old, came home for lunch one day, just as he almost always did. He was the same age as she was. And he was putting his shoes on to go back to work after lunch, and he had a massive heart attack
Oh,
and
my
died.
Lord.
And my grandmother had 4 children still at home, a 4-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 16-year-old, and an 18-year-old. She had never done anything with their finances. She'd never written a check. She could barely drive. My aunts tell this hilarious story how she could barely drive, and she would try to drive them to school, and she'd hold onto the steering wheel and go, "Help me, Jesus, help me, Jesus." But anyway, um, as I was growing up, I was a baby, I was a little girl, getting to know my grandmother. The grandmother I knew, I didn't have any idea that she was in this place of her. The whole landscape of her life had been upended. Everything she knew came
Was gone.
apart. She was left with no money other than his Social Security. She had never had a job. She had these 4 kids to feed. She had to immediately sell their home and go to a much smaller house, and just everything upended around her. As a little baby, little girl, I didn't know my grandmother was going through what I exactly went through so many years later. What I saw was this woman who was magical to me. She was gorgeous. She was always impeccably dressed, and there's a great sidebar to that. She didn't have any money after her husband died to buy good clothes, and so she began to get really adept at going to secondhand stores, the Salvation Army, the Orlando Junior League, and she would always find just that perfect, cashmere sweater and white pants, and she looked like she just was right out of Palm Beach every single time. And I think about, at the same time she was good at doing that, how hard even that had to be. But so you fast forward into what happened to me. I lost my husband. The whole landscape of my life changed just in a heartbeat, and I have been desperately trying to survive that for the last 4 years. So as a little girl, I didn't know that beautiful grandmother in front of me, who would go in the backyard and get underneath the grapefruit tree with me and make forts, and she really taught me to dream at the very time she was fighting so hard through her own fear, her loneliness, her desperation. And after James died, and we say on this show a lot how important it is to find the people, find the tools you can that give you, even if it's just the tiniest little bit of hope, as my sister says, a trembling hope. I began to really think about my grandmother, and I began to really talk to her. And some people don't subscribe to that belief system that those who go on before still help us when we're here, but I do. And her story began to help me so much. I just could relate to, oh my gosh, that gorgeous grandmother who never complained. Sorry, tears. I would say to myself, if she could do it, I can do it.
I don't want to interrupt you, but do you remember the moment where you realized that you were going through very similar of what she went through, but even though you saw it, you didn't realize how much she was struggling? Like, do you remember where was the moment you made that connection to it?
I don't know if it was in the first few days, but probably later, probably in the first few months, maybe 6 months after James died. And I just felt like I didn't know anybody who had to go through what I was going through. And I felt so fearful and so alone. And so somewhere when I began to really dissect, oh my gosh, my grandmother walked this walk. It was her journey out, even though I never got to talk to her about it.
Yeah.
Have remnants of it through my
And you were
aunts.
so young,
right.
too.
I have just remnants of it. it began to give me so much courage. Because every time I'd fold in on myself, I'd go, I can't do it. I just can't do this another day. I'm just mad. I'm just going to stay here alone and lonely and just be mad for the rest of my life.
I'm just mad.
I'm just mad. Her name was Helen. It's a name I absolutely treasure. And I would think about her and I would think, okay, you didn't even have the tools that I've got. You know, you didn't get to go to therapy. And it's just given me so much strength to draw on her. And so when I was prepping for the show, I thought, find those things in your past, find those people who give you any sense of hope to start rewriting your story. You know, every time I think about my grandmother, I know she would say to me, Teresa, it does no good, sweetie, just to sit here and grieve this and not go forward with it. You have to find a way, even if it is to go look for used clothes at the Salvation Army. That is, in and of itself, just a tiny walk out. So I just wanted to share that story of my beautiful grandmother.
I love that story, but I'm a big believer that God will always give you what you need when you don't realize it. You're going to need that later. And I've talked about it when I first got sick. I'm so grateful for that, even though it's not a great thing that happened. It brought me so much good, right? And I think even though she was the one that was struggling, it wasn't you because you were so young and you're so unaware of what was happening. There was still a purpose for it. Mm-hmm. So when you're able to find purpose on your struggle and rewrite that script instead of just focusing on the negative, how can that empower you? How can that be beneficial to you in the long run?
Well, I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
And it's something I think you sometimes don't talk about it. It's so much a part of your story.
Okay.
And I know it's not a label you give yourself, but I think it's so powerful and it answers your own question.
Okay.
Tell us what it was like to come to America as an immigrant and what you had to overcome and rewrite in your story to have the success you have today.
That's an interesting question because at first, I think the immigrant label, it's always like an up and down for me because I think a lot of people think of immigrant of being uneducated, uncultured, and kind of doing some of the jobs of, on the lower end. So when I first came from Brazil to the United States, I never thought of myself as an immigrant because originally I was only supposed to stay for a few months. So it was a part of this program and that was it. And I was supposed to go back. I had just graduated from law school but I've had experiences throughout my years where people will treat me like anybody else. And then I've had experiences where people will treat me like less of because I might have an accent or because they think I'm from a different country, so I am not educated or whatever they are, even being more sexualized because I am from Brazil and there's this sexualization
Absolutely.
of women from Brazil or from Latin countries. But I kind of go up and down on that.
For instance,
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but you told me a story that kind of broke my heart and it stuck with you and it changed your trajectory for a while because you couldn't rewrite it.
Yes.
About going to a university in New York to apply for a master's degree so that you could then sit for the bar in the U.S. And what happened?
There are some states in the U.S. that if you have, because the law in Brazil and here are very different, right? So if you have a master's degree, you can sit for the bar and then you can practice. So in my first couple years in the U.S., I went to a university, had a meeting with the dean without looking at my records, without getting into my education or anything, just based on a simple conversation. He said, I don't think this is for you. I don't think you're going to make it. I don't think you're going to pass. And at the time, I was so insecure with my English. I had recently got married. I was just kind of new here. I accepted his decision on that moment as that was it.
So
Like,
right there in that
that
moment,
was the
he
moment.
created a limiting belief for you.
100%. So like in that moment, it was like, okay, I'm never going to be able to have a job, or I'll make a decent income. I will never be able to have a career. I will never be able to provide for myself. I will always have, not that there's anything wrong with somebody that makes $15 an hour, but I never saw the picture of myself being able to like make a decent income and have like be in a position of a leadership, or be in a position where I could impact other people, because even though I had that education and I had a law degree and I had graduated as top of my class and I had done all these different things, because it was almost like all of that did not translate because I didn't have the perfect English, or because I wasn't born here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so funny because I was to go through groups of people where they would treat me a certain way, and the moment they found out I have a law degree, they would completely change.
Mm-hmm.
As if that degree changes my value or changes my character or anything else. It doesn't, because I graduated like in 2008. It's been a long time. Okay. So it's not like it's, I've developed a lot more in the last 15, 16 years, since there's a lot more to my character. It's such a tiny part of who I am.
How did you come away from that situation with that dean at that university? How long did it take you to go, I'm just not going to
Oh,
accept
it took
that?
years. I think it didn't really, that was probably 2010. And I don't think, I think I accepted that up until I got through my divorce and I had to figure out. So it was really just recent that I was like, no, I've got skills and I am smart and I can actually, lead other people, and I have value to teach, and I can help other people to develop their own careers and do things. So it took me like over a decade to actually get through that.
But what a beautiful journey, to
Thank
say,
you.
my life kind of stopped because one man put this belief in me that I couldn't be anything in America. And you sit here today and you are in charge of how many people? 60 some odd people?
No, like 30.
30
Yeah.
some odd people? I
I
just
mean,
like to
well,
dramatize it.
no, well, technically, I'm in charge of a lot more than that, because like direct reports, I have like 25 to 30, right? But then I have people that work with those people. So in a way, they're not my employees, but
You're
clients. So like I manage a large business, like revenue wise, and like how many people are involved, and there's multiple moving parts. And I've never saw myself in that position. It happened to me versus me chasing it down, because I didn't think about it, because I never thought I was going to be in that position. And I remember I was trying to get into school, and I had been in the US for, this was after the whole thing with the dean. And I remember trying to register for massage school, because I have a law degree and I have a massage also, very random. But, and I was panicking, like
panicking.
literally having a panic attack, because if this guy didn't think my English was going to be good enough for me to go to law school, how could my English be good enough to go to any school? So I remember I was married, I was having a panic attack, and my ex-husband was like not understanding why I'm freaking out so much. But I'm like, I don't think they're going to understand what I'm saying. And he's like, you are completely like crazy right now, because we because we have conversations every day. Yeah, your English is not perfect and you might not know a word or this or that, but you have conversations every day with people. And it was like those like panics where you like actually freeze and you can't do anything, you can't move, you can't think straight. I would have multiple of those because it was so nerve-wracking. And then I remember as I started going to school, it was like, it was new stuff because you have to learn about anatomy and all that stuff, and I've never studied that, but it was easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, if I had not gone through because of my panic, I would have never learned the things I learned, which later on became helpful with what I do today because I'm a personal trainer, so I work with people and there's value to what I learn. But at that moment, I didn't realize it. And it became this big monster. I worked for IBM for a while as a paralegal, and I remember freaking out about that one too. And I would just have these panic attacks, and now I'm just like, I got so over that. Then now when something happens, I'm like, yeah, whatever. If I suck at it, I don't care. Like, I'll find another job. Who cares? And I'm like, I'm so laid back now. That's like, if you had to compare, if there's a way to put the two people in the same room, I would probably laugh at myself of like how silly I was. But in the moment, I was so
You're
down, and I would panic. And I was like legit having panic attacks.
I think that's part of what you go through when you experience tragedy, though.
Yeah.
I certainly had panic attacks after James died. Often, I just couldn't see my way through.
Like even having to deal with the house stuff. Like the simple stuff that's every day was there.
The finances.
But you weren't in charge.
No, I hadn't been in charge of any of that.
Yeah.
And tragedy does something to you. It just kind of breaks you apart. But what I love about your story is that this many years later, maybe it wasn't this deliberate, oh, I'm rewriting my story, but I also know your drive, and somewhere inside you were coming up with that way of checks and balances within yourself that you were not going to stay down. You were not going to accept a profession that was not who and what you really thought yourself to be. Maybe you didn't know it in that moment.
I definitely
but you
did.
Begin to rewrite. But I similarly, and this doing this podcast is part of my, walking out of some of rewriting my story to
I think it's what, like you've said this once, it's your becoming. You said that to me before.
Yes.
That's your becoming, right?
One of my therapists, James and I called her Dr. Nancy. She was just fantastic. But I would come in with all my tales of sorrow and woe and crying, and I can't do this, I can't do this. And she would say, Teresa, you don't realize it, but this is you becoming who you're meant to be. And I would look at her, I wasn't happy about it. But then I began to love that word.
Yes.
And same thing with you. But what I was going to say a minute ago was, it's interesting too in life, like you had such success in Brazil, top of the class, graduating law school, get a great job right out of the gate. When I had the failure of the jewelry business, it caused me to have such limiting beliefs about myself as a business person, despite the fact that I had had another business for almost 20 years that was so successful. That business I had had for so much shorter length of time, and it failed not entirely because of me. Yes, I questioned myself about a lot of things, but we had terrible employee and fraud, and I wasn't capitalized enough to get through the fraud. But that stuck so hard inside of me, and the story I was telling myself was, between James and the failure of the business was, I can never be happy again. There's no real happiness out there for me ever again. I can never feel safe. I can never feel financially safe again after what happened with James and being left with debt I didn't know we had. And in business, I was like, I don't have anything left. I can't create good work again. And these 4 years have been, like you, not always a deliberate walkout. I've had a lot of people teaching and helping me. But there is a walkout when you go, you know what? And it's been so recent for me, but I have someone who's very dear to me, and he would say to me, Teresa, the failure of that business was nothing. It was absolutely nothing, and it wasn't your fault. And get out there and do something again. You've got another run in you. And honestly, this is my other run. I mean, I'm doing this. I'm getting out there for the first time, and I'm rewriting my story with this show.
But then it's how you, like, going back to like having purpose with your struggle, right? You got to turn into something that's good. Like if you didn't have that failure, you don't have that to talk about it and to share
True.
with other people and empower other people to be like, hey, yes, you did fail, but that doesn't mean it's over. It's not game over. Okay, that didn't work. Wasn't for me. Let's move on. What's next, right?
Right. But it takes courage.
It does.
But courage hand in hand with rewriting your story, really saying to yourself, what is it I want to be? Because I can do that now. I can get alone and say, okay, where are you folding in on yourself today? Where do you feel like you're sitting in failure again? And I can, and I love to write and I journal everything. And I definitely, subscribe to that as a path toward healing. But I sit there and I write, okay, how do I want to feel in life today? Next week, 5 years from now? What is the life I really desire to live? How do I walk out of this? And just the act, it is I like to think of it as, it's like a turning the page. You write your story of what you're stuck in, and you literally and figuratively turn the page and write the story of what you want it to be. And you begin to create anew, I should say, a life that is more aligned with who you want to be, who you desire to be. I am just learning that.